The village of Kadala rested quietly at the edge of the forest, where the earth was red, the winds whispered secrets, and time itself seemed to hum in the air. It was not on any map, nor was it often visited by travelers. Those who did stumble upon it often left speaking in hushed tones, reluctant to share too much for fear of sounding mad. Kadala had always been a place caught between the real and the mystical, where one could walk down a familiar path and find that it no longer led where it once did, or hear laughter echo from a hut long abandoned. The people of the village lived in respectful rhythm with the unseen. They left offerings at the base of old trees, never whistled at night, and covered their mirrors after sundown. In this village lived a girl named Nalia. She was known for her quiet nature and the strange, almost knowing look in her eyes. She had skin the color of roasted coffee beans and a mane of coiled black hair that her mother Ao used to braid every morning as they sat on a reed mat outside their round hut. Her laughter was soft but contagious, her gaze often fixed on things others couldn't see, shadows behind the light, glints of movement in still water, echoes with no voice. She wasn't considered odd, not in Kadala where such children were thought to walk with the spirits. Her mother Ao was one of the village's most respected herbalists. She had a gift with plants, yes, but also with energy. She knew which leaves calmed the mind, which roots drew out infection, and which teas opened dreams. People whispered that she could speak with ancestors in her sleep, though no one dared ask her directly. She raised Nalia alone, her husband having disappeared into the forest one afternoon and never returned. No one searched too deeply. In Kadala, when the forest took someone, it was not for mortals to ask why. Ao's death was sudden and without warning. One morning she was strong, kneeling by the river to wash herbs. That evening she was gone, found lying cold in her hut, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling as if she had seen something so powerful, so final, that her spirit had fled before her heart could follow. The village mourned. Nalia, only 9 years old at the time, sat in silence at the funeral, her hands folded, her lips trembling but her eyes dry. She didn't cry for days, not until she wandered into the forest one afternoon and came back with torn clothes and a blank expression. She never said what she saw. Shortly after, a new woman arrived in the village. Her name was Saraphina. She claimed to have been Ao's cousin from a neighboring region. No one had ever heard of her, but she came bearing gifts, spices not found in Kadala, colorful cloths with patterns that shimmered in the sun, and coins with strange symbols etched into them. She wore fine clothes and a silver chain around her ankle that made a soft sound wherever she walked. She moved into Ao's hut as though it had always been hers, saying it was her duty to take care of Nalia now. The elders questioned her once, but Saraphina offered them sweet wine brewed from fruits they'd never tasted, and they stopped asking. Nalia watched the changes quietly. The hut no longer smelled of herbs but of incense that clung to the air long after it had burned out. The windows, once open to birds and sunlight, were covered with black cloth. The mirror in the sleeping room was turned to face the wall. Her mother's charms, which had once hung above every doorway, were replaced by tiny glass pendants that flashed even when no light touched them. Saraphina said little, but when she did speak, her words were slow, measured, and cold. At first, Saraphina was kind. She cooked meals and combed Nalia's hair, told her stories at night of lands far away where the sky danced with color and spirits rode on the backs of birds. But there was a tightness to her smile, a sharpness to her touch, like she was always just barely holding something in. And her eyes, black, too black, sometimes stared at Nalia as though trying to read her thoughts. Strange things began to happen. Nalia's dreams, once filled with her mother's songs and riverside laughter, turned dark. She saw herself standing in endless corridors of mirrors, each reflection slightly wrong. One grinned when she frowned. Another wept blood. Sometimes she woke to find herself standing, not in bed, but in front of the mirror, staring at a version of herself that didn't blink when she did. The village noticed Nalia's growing silence, but Saraphina insisted the girl was merely grieving. Children see ghosts when they do not understand death, she said. But the villagers knew grief, they knew what it looked like. What Nalia was showing was something else. She started to speak less, withdrawing from the other children. Animals began to shy away from her. Her voice sometimes echoed oddly, as if someone else had spoken with her tone a second after her. And one night, the cloth that covered the bedroom mirror was found burned at the edges, though no fire had been lit. Saraphina scolded her, but Nalia swore she had not touched it. The mirror began to play tricks. Reflections lingered. Lights blinked where there were none. Nalia once reached for her comb and saw her reflection smile before she did. She blinked hard, and her own face stared back normal and still. But the fear stayed. It was then Saraphina began to change. She locked the doors at night. She muttered incantations under her breath. Nalia once caught her drawing symbols on the floor in ash and bone. When confronted, Saraphina smiled too wide and said, "Protection, my dear. There are things in this house that are not of us." The other villagers didn't intervene. They feared Saraphina more than they trusted their own instincts. A woman who came from nowhere, who spoke to spirits, who offered them trinkets that never lost their shine. It was easier to look away, to tell themselves the girl would grow out of her oddness. Then came the whispers. Children claimed they saw another Nalia in the woods, her eyes black and her mouth stitched shut. A goat died without wounds, but its reflection in the water showed a neck twisted backward. The mirror in the village elder's hut cracked in the center without being touched. At night, Nalia would hear tapping, soft, rhythmic like fingers against glass. She stopped looking at mirrors entirely. But Saraphina insisted she face them. "You must learn who you are," she'd say, guiding Nalia before the glass and standing behind her. "Even the pieces you don't want to see." One night, the moon disappeared. No stars, no light. Just blackness. And in that darkness, Saraphina's voice sang something low and cold. Nalia, too afraid to leave her mat, closed her eyes. But in the black of her mind, she saw her reflection looking back, only it had no face. Just smooth skin. A blank canvas. It raised a hand, pointed at her, and then the image shattered. When she woke the next day, all the mirrors in the house had been covered again. Except one. It sat in the center of the living room. Tall. Ancient. Framed in rusted gold. A cloth lay at its base, folded neatly. Nalia could see herself in it. Only herself. For now. That morning, Saraphina told her, "You are ready." Ready for what, she didn't say. But Nalia knew. Somewhere inside her, in that deep place where her mother's voice once whispered lullabies, something else now stirred. Something patient. Something waiting. In the months that followed Saraphina's arrival, something shifted in the hut that had once been filled with the aroma of crushed herbs and laughter. The walls, once plastered with clay symbols that brought warmth, now held a silence that hummed low and strange. At first, the changes were subtle. An extra lock on the door, curtains drawn tighter than necessary, and meals seasoned with bitter spices that stung the tongue. Then came the more deliberate acts. Saraphina began to limit who could visit. Friends who once came to sit with Nalia under the mango tree found the gate shut, the smiles gone, the welcome replaced with a thin-lipped nod and eyes that watched too closely. She claimed it was to protect the girl. "There are those in the village," Saraphina said, "who envy her. They see her mother's gifts in her, and jealousy brews wickedness." To some, it sounded like paranoia. To others, it sounded like truth. But the more Saraphina spoke it, the more isolated Nalia became. She stopped attending gatherings, even the ones honoring her mother's memory. If villagers asked, Saraphina would smile and say, "She's resting. Her soul is delicate right now." And when children peered through the fence to call out her name, Saraphina's voice would lash out like a whip, "Go home. Nalia doesn't want company." Soon they stopped coming altogether. Inside the home, Saraphina's control deepened. Meals were rationed. The once vibrant walls were stripped of anything resembling joy. Nalia's toys were stored away for safekeeping, and she was given strict tasks: grind herbs, sweep floors, chant words in a language that felt like shards in her throat. If she made mistakes, Saraphina's punishment was silence. Days without speech, without acknowledgement. Nalia once cried in her sleep, whispering for her mother. The next morning, she woke to find her hair shorn, jagged tufts where her thick curls had been. It wasn't just cruelty, it was method. Each day Saraphina peeled back layers of who Nalia had been, molding her into something quiet, obedient, watching. She taught her to speak softly, walk without sound, and never, under any circumstance, look too long into her own reflection. But reflections were hard to avoid when the house itself seemed to multiply them. At first, there were just 2 mirrors. One in the sleeping room, the other in the common space. Then Saraphina brought another, older one, etched with unfamiliar glyphs. Soon there were 5, 10, 15. Some large and ornate, others handheld or mounted, each reflecting different angles of Nalia's shrinking world. The largest stood behind a locked door that Saraphina opened only at night. Nalia could hear her in there, chanting, humming, laughing. And once, crying in a voice that wasn't hers. It was the room no one spoke of, the one the elders whispered about in the marketplace when they thought no one could hear. The room with the mirrors. The legend dated back before even the oldest among them could remember, passed down in fragmented songs and warnings wrapped in metaphor. "Beware the mirror that stares too long," they'd say. It remembers more than you do. One version of the tale spoke of a traveling spirit woman who came with mirrors that could show you your true self. But those who stared too long found not truth, but duplicity. Their reflections stepped out, free and hungry, while the real ones were trapped inside, screaming behind glass that no one else could hear. Others claimed it was a cursed shrine, built when the village was first founded to trap the spirits of a defeated cult. The mirrors were their prison, each one holding a soul that longed to return, that waited for a crack, a moment of eye contact, a weakened will. Over time, people stopped building homes with mirrors. Children were told to avoid reflections after sunset. Travelers were warned to turn their faces when they washed in moonlit streams. But time passed. And like most things, the warnings became stories, the stories became myths, and the myths became nothing more than superstition. Until Saraphina arrived. She began to ask questions. About the shrine. About the mirror room that supposedly once stood beneath the elder's hut, sealed off after a girl went missing. She inquired about a ritual, one that involved the merging of spirits and reflections. The elders refused to speak. But Saraphina had her ways. A touch on the hand, a whisper in the ear, a powder slipped into a drink. Soon they talked more than they should have. Nalia overheard snippets. She asked about the twins who vanished near the river. She wanted to know which mirror cracked during the eclipse. She's collecting glass from the old forest shrine. There was fear in their voices but also fascination. Saraphina wasn't just a woman. She was a vessel for something old, something the village had tried to forget. The mirror room grew. Saraphina opened the locked door more often. Nalia caught glimpses, a table covered in dark cloth, candles shaped like twisted hands, mirrors layered in a circle. Reflections that didn't line up with their owners. And her reflection began to behave strangely. It lingered when she turned away. It smiled when she frowned. One night she saw it whisper something. But there was no sound. She told no one. Who would believe her? Not the villagers, not the elders, not even herself. But the fear in her belly didn't lie. It churned whenever she stepped into that part of the house, whenever Saraphina's eyes locked onto hers with that glint, half curiosity, half hunger. Then came the night of the moonless sky, when Saraphina gathered mirrors in the central room. Nalia was made to sit cross-legged in the middle, surrounded by glass, each pane angled to reflect her from every direction. Saraphina whispered words. The candles flickered. And in each mirror, Nalia saw a different version of herself. One wept. One screamed. One grinned wide and toothless. One stood still, blank-faced and hollow-eyed. But all stared directly at her. At the real her. You are not whole, Saraphina murmured. Not yet. You must know yourself fully to become what you were born to be. She tried to flee. But the doors had been locked and Saraphina only smiled. It's not punishment, child. It's preparation. We're peeling back the veil. From that night on, Nalia was forced to spend hours in the mirror room. Staring. Watching. Trying not to blink. The reflections began to move independently. They copied her at first. Then they anticipated. Then they defied. She once turned her head left and watched a reflection walk right, disappearing from frame. The next day, a mirror in the hallway was cracked. Saraphina said nothing, but Nalia could see the tension in her jaw. She was pushing the boundary. The veil between reflection and flesh was thinning. Nalia could feel it in her chest, in the way the air trembled when she breathed. Her dreams became darker, full of whispers in her own voice, warnings from her own face. She's not your mother. That room is not for you. She's making something. Something with your face. And yet, despite the fear, a part of her was drawn to it. Drawn to the reflections that seemed to know more than she did. There was power in those mirrors. She felt it. Power to see, to remember, to become. Maybe Saraphina wasn't lying. Maybe there was truth in the horror. Maybe the legend wasn't just a tale, it was a ritual, a transformation. But who was she becoming? The villagers grew restless. Birds no longer nested near the hut. A boy who peeked through the curtain claimed he saw Nalia's face split in two. Chickens laid cracked eggs. The well water turned murky near their home. And one day the village elder awoke to find a single mirror standing outside his door. It was small, framed in blackened wood. In it he saw his own face, and behind it the reflection of a girl with no eyes. That week the whispers returned. Old women spat over their shoulders. Children were told not to stray too close to the fence. One man claimed he saw Saraphina walking in the fields at dawn, but her shadow moved in the opposite direction. And in the mirror room, Nalia stood alone one night, surrounded by silent glass. Her reflection no longer frightened her. They were like sisters now, watching, waiting. She raised a hand. They raised theirs. But one in the farthest mirror, didn't move. It stood still, featureless, faceless. It tilted its head. And for the first time Nalia heard it speak, not with sound but inside her bones. "I am what you left behind." She stumbled back, heart pounding. And when she turned to run, she saw Saraphina standing in the doorway, arms folded, smile wide. "Now," she said softly. "You are ready." It began with the smallest of things, hardly worth noticing at first. A flicker in the corner of her eye as she passed the mirror in the hallway. A shimmer in the reflection of the window that didn't match the stillness outside. At first, Nalia told herself it was tiredness. That her mind, battered by the long silences and Seraphina's twisting words, was playing tricks on her. But each night the sense grew stronger. She was not alone when she looked into glass. Something watched her back. Something patient. She had long stopped calling it her reflection. Reflections were supposed to follow. Mimic, mirror. This presence inside the glass had a mind of its own. She would frown and it would smile, a wide, hungry smile that never touched the eyes. She would turn her face and it would hold still, unblinking. Sometimes it would blink out of sync, a beat too late or too early, like a puppet with the wrong strings. Her thoughts no longer felt private. When she sat still, breathing quietly, she could hear whispers, low and urgent, slipping from the mirrors like fog curling beneath a doorframe. She couldn't make out the words at first, but the tone was unmistakable. It wasn't her voice, but it knew her name. Nalia. The loneliness weighed like stone against her chest. She ached for her mother, though she could barely remember the sound of her laughter anymore. Seraphina's voice had overwritten so much of her world, sharp, smooth, commanding. It snuck into her dreams, into her thoughts. She began to question herself. Were her memories real? Had she ever truly felt joy? Or was it just another illusion reflected back at her, something she wished she had seen in the glass? Her room, once familiar, now felt like a stranger's. She began sleeping with her back to the mirrors, but it made no difference. The presence remained, growing bolder each night. She would wake with her hair tangled in knots, her limbs stiff as if someone had tried to move her. The mirrors would be fogged from the inside, smudged with fingerprints she hadn't left. One night she found writing on the glass. "Let me out." She blinked, rubbed her eyes, but the words remained. And then, slowly, they faded as though the mirror had swallowed them. The next morning, Seraphina asked how she had slept, her voice full of forced sweetness. Nalia lied. Peacefully. But Seraphina only nodded too knowingly. Nalia began experimenting. She would look into one mirror while moving subtly, blinking, twitching a finger, raising her eyebrow. Most of the time the reflections copied her. But not always. There were moments, fleeting but undeniable, where one reflection lagged behind, as though it had to remember what she had just done. Sometimes, in the stillness of midday, she'd sit in the center of the mirror room and watch herself multiplied in endless angles. Her favorite mirror, the one with the old cracks shaped like vines, once showed her standing when she was clearly sitting. It was her. Same dress, same face. But the expression was different. Older. Wiser. Or maybe just broken. It unnerved her deeply. The girl she saw in the mirror looked like she had seen too much. Like she had escaped something horrible but left parts of herself behind. Nalia began to speak aloud in the mirror room. Not prayers, not chants like Seraphina, just questions. "Who are you?" she would ask. "Why are you watching me? What do you want?" And sometimes, when the light was just right, she could almost see lips moving behind the glass. Her sense of time warped. Days bled into nights and dreams into waking hours. She stopped counting the weeks she'd been trapped in the house. Trapped in herself. Trapped in the silence. Seraphina rarely spoke unless it was to instruct or scold. But Nalia had started to understand something terrible. Her stepmother wasn't just using the mirrors. She was feeding them. Feeding something inside them. And Nalia was the main course. She started losing things. Her laughter. Her appetite. Her sense of where her body ended and where the reflection began. Once, she caught herself brushing her teeth, watching her reflection carefully, and realizing the girl in the mirror had already finished. Was wiping her mouth. And grinning. Other times it was the shadows. Reflections showed them growing longer than they should, curving around her like fingers. Once, she saw a second shadow pass behind her, but when she turned, no one was there. Still, the mirror showed a third figure. Just standing. Watching. She scratched her arm until it bled once, just to prove to herself she was real. The mirror showed the blood, yes, but it pooled into symbols, patterns she didn't recognize. She looked down at her real wound. It was just blood. But in the mirror? It was a message. She began drawing the patterns on paper, hiding them beneath the floorboards. She didn't know why, just that something deep inside her, something raw and scared, told her it was important. She didn't trust Saraphina, didn't trust the house. But most of all, she didn't trust herself. Because sometimes when she spoke, her voice sounded different. Sometimes she laughed at things that weren't funny. And sometimes, she caught her reflection doing things she hadn't done, like mouthing names she didn't recognize, faces she didn't remember. The identity struggle was tearing her apart. Who was she truly? The girl who trembled in bed, clutching scraps of memory from her mother? Or the girl in the mirror who smiled with a predator's calm and whispered things Nalia didn't understand? One night she heard her name again, not in her head but out loud. It came from every mirror at once. Nalia. It was said with reverence, with hunger. She bolted from the room, heart pounding, breath ragged. Saraphina stood in the hallway, calm as ever. "They're waking," she said simply. "They're recognizing you now. Soon you'll be able to cross." "To what?" Nalia asked, voice barely more than a whisper. Saraphina didn't answer. She walked away, leaving behind the scent of burning herbs and the chilling echo of the word cross. That night, Nalia dreamed she was inside the mirror. The world was gray and glassy, with shifting versions of herself darting between panes. Some were monstrous. Some were weeping. One looked exactly like her, except for the absence of a face. It reached for her and she woke screaming. In the morning, the mirror beside her bed was shattered. And in the center, written in dust, was, "You're almost ready." She stopped sleeping after that. Not truly. She would drift, then jolt awake, drenched in sweat. She felt herself unraveling, pieces of her slipping into the glass, into those other versions. But worse, she feared something was slipping out. She began to notice people reacting strangely. The few times Saraphina allowed her into the village, adults would glance at her and look away quickly. Children would cry. Dogs barked wildly. One woman dropped her basket. It happened on a day painted too perfectly. The sky was clear, a pale blue so smooth it looked unreal, like it had been polished by invisible hands. Birds sang louder than usual. The village bustled with unusual energy. Market stalls bright with fruits and dyed cloth, neighbors greeting one another with strange urgency. There was an underlying hum, something Nalia couldn't name. It was in the air. In the soil. In the glances people exchanged when they thought she wasn't looking. Nalia had woken that morning to Saraphina sitting at the edge of her bed, her long fingers gently combing Nalia's hair. It was so out of character that Nalia froze. "My child," Saraphina said softly, almost lovingly, "you've grown too quiet lately. The house is full of sadness. It's time for a cleansing. To release what has settled on your soul like dust." Nalia said nothing. Her instincts screamed at her to recoil, but she couldn't. Her body remained still, stiff under Saraphina's gentle caress. The woman's words slid through the room like honey laced with poison. "I've spoken with the elders," Saraphina continued. "They've agreed. You'll undergo the ritual this evening. It's a tradition older than this village. It will restore your clarity, and your beauty." Beauty. That word. Nalia didn't recognize it anymore. She'd stopped looking at herself without fear. Mirrors had become battlegrounds and her face, her real face, was something she only glimpsed in shadows now. Still she nodded. Not because she believed Saraphina, but because something told her resistance was pointless. Whatever was going to happen had already been decided. The hours that followed were strange. People treated her differently. The baker gave her a sweet roll without charge, eyes lowered. An old woman pressed dried herbs into her palm and whispered, "Hold them tight. They remember." A child ran up, clutched her skirt and said, "Don't forget your real name," before being pulled away by a mother whose expression was carved from stone. Everyone knew. Everyone. But no one stopped it. When dusk came, the air turned heavy. The sun bled into the horizon, casting everything in amber and rust. A procession formed, small, quiet, cloaked figures who came not to celebrate but to witness. Saraphina dressed Nalia in white, with a red string tied around her wrist. "To bind you," she said, smiling. "To keep you from floating away." They walked through the village slowly. Every footstep echoed louder than it should. Nalia looked into the eyes of those who lined the path. She searched for sympathy. For guilt. For even the faintest sign of someone who might reach for her hand and pull her away from the edge. But she saw nothing but resignation. When they reached the old wing of the house, the forgotten part where the walls whispered and the air never warmed, Saraphina stopped in front of the tall double doors. They hadn't been opened in years. Not since Nalia was a child. Not since the first time she had heard the legends. She stood frozen as Saraphina pulled out a brass key that shimmered despite the fading light. The key didn't look like it belonged to any world Nalia knew. It was too smooth, too perfect, its shape too unnatural. It slid into the lock like it had been waiting. The doors creaked open and the mirror room breathed. It was colder than she remembered. Mirrors lined the walls from floor to ceiling, some cracked, others pristine. Each one seemed to shimmer with anticipation. She saw herself multiplied 100-fold, and yet none of the reflections looked quite right. Some blinked too slowly. Some had lips curled in sly smirks. A few had no eyes at all. She wanted to step back. Run. But Seraphina's hand on her back was firm. In you go, Nalia. You must sit in the center. Only then can the ritual begin. Her feet moved without her permission. She crossed the threshold, her skin prickling. The room swallowed her whole. Seraphina followed her in, then circled around her like a vulture. She lit candles in each corner, their flames flickering unnaturally. She placed bowls of dark herbs and stones at points around the room and began to chant in a tongue that scraped against Nalia's bones. Nalia stood still, trembling, until Seraphina motioned to the center of the room. Kneel. She obeyed. Because what choice did she have? The chant grew louder, thicker. It twisted around the mirrors, which now began to shimmer as though underwater. Nalia could hear something behind the glass, shifting, murmuring, stirring. And then Seraphina stopped chanting. Silence crashed in. Nalia looked up. Her stepmother stood at the door, the key in her hand again. You were never mine, Seraphina said quietly, almost regretfully. But I needed a vessel. And you were perfect. Nalia's breath hitched. What are you talking about? You don't belong to this world entirely, Nalia. You never did. That's why they feared you. Why they left you with me. Your mother knew. That's why she had to go. Nalia's heart stuttered. She was going to take you away. I do. But I couldn't allow that. Not when the mirrors had already chosen you. No, Nalia whispered. No, you're lying. I'm setting you free, Seraphina said, stepping back across the threshold. From the world. From the lies. From your flesh. She closed the doors. Nalia jumped to her feet, rushing toward them, but she was too late. The brass key turned with a heavy finality. The lock clicked. No, she screamed, banging her fists on the wood. Seraphina. Please. She heard only footsteps, fading. Then, silence. And then the mirrors woke. They began to hum. A low, vibrating sound that came from deep within the glass. Every reflection stared directly at her. None blinked. Some began to move, mimicking her frantic movements, while others did not. Then the whispering returned. Dozens of voices, no longer incoherent. You're home. You belong here. She has given you to us. Come, come, come. When Nalia passed and whispered, That's not the same girl. At the stream she caught her own reflection in the water, and it winked at her. The duality became unbearable. She felt like two people. One grounded in flesh, still clinging to memories of her mother. And the other, a gathering storm of mirrors, whispers, and unspoken things. The reflection girl. The glass child. The version that never flinched, never cried, never hesitated. Sometimes Nalia envied her. There were moments she considered letting go. Walking into the mirror room and just staring. Letting the reflection take over. Maybe it would be easier. Maybe the pain would stop. But then she'd find a note her mother had hidden years ago. A pressed flower. A ribbon. A soft hum in her memory. And she would remember she was loved once. She was whole once. The mirrors hadn't won. Not yet. But they were circling. One evening she stood in front of the largest mirror. Her reflection stood still just as it should. And yet the feeling in the air was different. Electric. Alive. The air shimmered slightly. And then the reflection stepped forward. Not physically. Not yet. But the posture changed, the eyes locked with hers. And for the first time the reflection spoke. I'm not here to hurt you, it said, voice like 1,000 versions of Nalia speaking in harmony. I am what's left when you are forgotten. I am the face you shed to survive. Nalia shook her head. You're not real. I am more real than the girl who hides from her own strength. Then why do you haunt me? Because she made me. The reflection tilted its head. Seraphina tore us apart, split you like wood. I am the part she doesn't control. Nalia stepped back, heart racing. Then what do you want? The mirror rippled slightly like disturbed water. To return. To be whole again. But you must choose, Nalia. Who will you be, the reflection, or the girl in pieces? The mirror darkened. Her reflection was gone. Only her pale, frightened face stared back. But in that moment something clicked inside her. She was fractured, yes. Haunted, yes. But not broken. Not yet. Something had been stolen from her. And if it lived inside the glass, she would go in and take it back. Even if it meant becoming something the village feared. Even if it meant becoming the girl in the mirror. She backed away, stumbling into the center of the room again. The mirrors shimmered and her reflection split, fractured into countless versions of herself. Some weeping. Some furious. One was laughing, wild and unhinged. One had no face. She clutched the red string on her wrist. It burned now as though alive. She tried to untie it, but it wouldn't loosen. It pulsed in time with her heartbeat. The room darkened as if the candles had dimmed. But the flames were steady. It was the mirrors that were swallowing the light. Nalia sank to her knees, shaking, whispering to herself. This isn't real. This isn't real. This isn't. A hand touched her shoulder. She screamed, turning, but no one was there. The reflections laughed. She looked back at the mirrors. In each one she was still kneeling. But in each, something stood behind her. Tall, shadowed, watching. The face in the center mirror began to melt. Her own features slid off like wax, revealing empty skin, blank smoothness where eyes and mouth should be. And yet the faceless version moved. It tilted its head. It raised a hand. It beckoned. Nalia couldn't breathe. The air was thick with memory, fear, betrayal. She thought of her mother, of lullabies hummed in the dark, of stories told by firelight. She remembered the soft curve of her mother's fingers on her cheek, the safety she had once known. She screamed again, not words but raw sound. A primal sound. One that shook the glass. The reflections flickered. A few cracked. The whispering turned into a hiss. You are not hers. You are ours. Let go. And then, her own voice from the mirror. But it wasn't a reflection. It was another Nalia. One with glowing eyes and black veins running across her skin. One who smiled not with kindness but with victory. Give in, it said. Become what you were meant to be. You don't need their world. No, Nalia said, voice trembling. I am me. I am Nalia. I remember who I am. The string on her wrist tightened, then snapped. Light burst from the mirrors. A blinding flash. The room trembled. Glass cracked. The whispers turned to shrieks. And then, silence. Nalia collapsed, the world spinning around her. She was alone. But not truly. Something else was in there with her now. Something wearing her face. Something that had been waiting a very long time. The silence after the explosion of light wasn't peaceful. It was loaded, thick and vibrating as if the very air held its breath. Nalia lay curled in the center of the mirror room, her palms scraped, the broken red thread tangled around her fingers. Her ears rang. Her thoughts pulsed like a second heartbeat. And then came the ticking. Soft at first, like the sound of a distant clock. Tick, tick, tick. It was not from the walls, nor the ceiling. It came from the glass. All of them, every mirror now shimmered slightly as though under rippling water. The ticking grew louder, then stopped, and the reflections began to move again. But they didn't copy her. They had lives of their own. One version of Nalia stood tall, her face blank and regal, wearing a crown of thorns. Another danced madly in a room filled with smoke, laughing with eyes too wide. A third cowered in a corner, thin as a shadow, whispering to herself. Nalia staggered to her feet, her knees buckling. Stop it, she rasped. Just stop. A mirror to her left shimmered and lit up. She turned toward it and gasped. She saw herself, but younger, barely 5, sitting in her mother's lap by the hearth. Her mother's arms wrapped tightly around her, humming an old lullaby. The sound didn't come through the glass, but Nalia could feel it. The warmth, the comfort. She reached out, aching to touch it. But when her fingertips met the glass, the scene shifted violently. Fire engulfed the hearth. Her mother's face melted. The little Nalia screamed as something unseen dragged her backward into darkness. Nalia recoiled, her hand burning. Another mirror shimmered. This one showed a version of her standing in the village square. Everyone was clapping for her. She wore a necklace of pearls, her dress brilliant white. A celebration. But then the villagers' faces twisted. Applause turned to growling. Teeth lengthened. Eyes bled black. The joyful crowd turned beastly and lunged at her reflection, ripping her apart. Nalia screamed and turned away. She spun in place. Each mirror now alive. Each one telling a different story. In one she saw herself running endlessly through a forest with no sky. In another she was a prisoner in a cell of mirrors, her mouth sewn shut. In one she was old, withered, whispering spells from a crumbling book. Each version of herself bore a mark of fear, madness, or transformation. The ticking resumed. Faster now. Tick 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 tick. Time didn't feel right. Her thoughts spiraled. She remembered things that hadn't happened, yet they felt real. A birthday she never had. A friend who never existed. A conversation with her mother that couldn't have happened. Yet she recalled the warmth of her hand, the scent of her hair. She backed into a mirror behind her. It shimmered and pulled her in. There was no transition, just a tearing sensation like falling through a tear in the sky. Suddenly she stood in a vast white space. No floor. No ceiling. Only endless whiteness, and hundreds of versions of herself surrounding her. They stood in a circle. All staring. Some with pity. Some with hatred. Some with empty sockets where eyes should have been. Then they began to speak. One by one. You should have listened. You were never strong enough. She gave you a chance and you wasted it. They will never love you. Let go. Nalia spun in place, their voices stabbing at her mind. I am me, she whispered. I am real. But the voices answered back. Which you? Who do you think you are now? There are so many of us. And none of us are whole. Suddenly one stepped forward. This version looked identical, except for her mouth. It had been carved into a permanent smile, stretched unnaturally wide. Let me take over, she said sweetly. I'll make everything better. I'll say all the things you're afraid to say. Do all the things you fear. Nalia shook her head violently. No. Another stepped forward. This one held a blood-stained doll and cried without sound. You left me, the crying version whispered. You forgot me. The soft parts. The weak ones. You locked me away. No, I had to survive. And what did you become? Another snapped. You let her rule you. You watched your mother die and did nothing. I didn't know. Nalia sobbed. I was a child. A child with power. And you wasted it. The white space cracked. The ground beneath her feet shattered like glass. She fell, again. No gravity. Just collapse. And then she was back. Back in the mirror room. Panting. Crying. Shaking. The mirrors pulsed with a soft light now. Less violent. More curious. She looked at herself again. Just herself. And for a moment, it was real. Her own eyes. Her own sorrow. Her own face. She stepped forward and placed her hand on the mirror. The surface rippled again, but it didn't pull her in this time. Instead, it showed her possibility. A future she had not lived yet. A version of herself walking free from this house, standing tall, her shadow stretching long and strong behind her. She swallowed hard. The ticking stopped. The mirrors fell silent. Nalia stood in the center of the room, surrounded by 1,000 selves, 1,000 fates, 1,000 fears. And for the first time she whispered, not in fear but with recognition. I see you. The reflections smiled, not cruelly this time but knowingly. The room was still. But something had changed. And deep within the glass, something turned its gaze elsewhere. The test was not over. But the girl was no longer breaking. She was awakening. The door creaked open slowly as if resisting. Its iron hinges let out a sound that wasn't quite a groan, not quite a scream, something in between. The air that spilled from the mirror room was ice cold, thick like breathless fog. It swept down the hallway, brushing past the old stones of the house like fingers reaching out for warmth. But there was none. Something walked out. At first no one was there to see it. No witnesses. Just the house itself, which had stood too long and remembered too much. Then the village dog howled, long and broken, a sound that made birds burst out of trees and cows stop chewing mid-motion. The thing that stepped into the world looked like Nalia, but not quite. It was her height. Wore the same tattered dress she had been locked away in. Moved with the same quiet grace. But her face was gone. There was skin. Smooth, pale, unblemished. No eyes. No mouth. No nose. Just a blank, soft curve of flesh where a face should have been. And yet, somehow she looked. You could feel it, the weight of her attention even without eyes. A presence that lingered just a moment too long. She walked out barefoot, soundless, leaving faint footprints behind. Except they didn't stay. They shimmered for a moment, then faded like breath on glass. She moved down the hallway, past the candlelit altar the stepmother had placed, past the offerings of salt and chalk, past the closed doors of rooms no longer used. When the servants saw her, they froze. One dropped a bowl which shattered loudly. The faceless one turned. She didn't move suddenly. There was no lunge, no noise. Just a slow tilt of the head. And something inside the servant broke. She began to cry without knowing why. By the time the faceless one stepped out into the sunlit courtyard, the whole household had gathered. Word had spread, the door opened, she's out, the girl is free. But what they saw wasn't Nalia. The villagers, once curious, took a collective step back. Mothers held children tighter. Men reached for charms or whispered prayers under their breath. The elder priest spat on the ground and muttered, "Not her. That's not the child. That's something else." The stepmother came forward. At first, her face was a carefully crafted mask of concern. But when she saw the faceless one, her expression wavered. For a heartbeat, her eyes widened. Her fingers twitched. Still, she composed herself. She stepped forward slowly, performing for the crowd. "This is the price of defiance," she said solemnly. The spirits were angered. The ritual, she must have tainted it. Poor Nalia. She placed a hand over her heart. She was always unbalanced. But the faceless one did not speak. Could not speak. She simply stared, or rather, let her silence stretch across the courtyard like a veil. A veil that made hearts beat too fast and minds search for logic where there was none. Then she turned. She walked past the villagers. No one dared stop her. Some stepped aside. Others didn't move at all, too paralyzed by fear or awe or confusion. As she passed, some villagers thought they heard things. Old lullabies in the back of their minds, the sound of breaking glass, the hush of whispering mirrors. Children stared and whispered behind their hands. "She doesn't have a face. Maybe she traded it. Maybe it's not even her." Somewhere, a baby cried. Dogs refused to approach her. She walked all the way to the edge of the forest, where her mother had once gone to gather herbs, long before the stepmother arrived. There, under the thick canopies, she stopped. She stood motionless for a long time, like a statue made of flesh and silence. The stepmother began crafting her story immediately. "She is cursed," she told the village. "The girl was touched by something dark. But do not fear. I will keep the evil contained. We must all be strong." Whispers followed. Doubt grew like roots under their skin. Why had the mirrors opened? Why had she walked out at all? And why did the faceless girl not rage or scream? Why did she seem so calm? That was the part that chilled them more than anything. Not the missing face. Not the impossible return. But the stillness. The patience. The feeling that whatever had come out of that room had already seen everything, and judged it unworthy of reaction. Some said she was no longer Nalia at all. Others said she was Nalia, and everything else had been stripped away, leaving only the part that remembered every betrayal, every lie, every time the door had been locked and the truth buried. A few brave souls whispered theories in private. She chose to give up her face. She saw too much in the mirrors. She gave herself away to something older. But no one dared approach her again. She remained at the edge of the village for 3 days. Watching. Listening without ears. Feeling everything. And then one night she vanished into the forest. No footprints. No signs. Just the feeling, one they couldn't shake, that she hadn't really left. Not completely. The village was never the same after that day. The moment the faceless one walked out of the mirror room, something intangible had cracked. It wasn't visible like shattered glass, but it was there, present in the way people walked faster past doorways, in the way candles were kept lit through the night, in the way mirrors began to vanish from homes one by one. No one said it aloud, not at first, but everyone knew. Something had changed. Children were no longer allowed to play alone. Parents whispered warnings in their ears. Don't stare into puddles, don't look into polished spoons, don't linger too long at windows after dark. Some even went as far as to remove all reflective surfaces from their homes, smashing mirrors with hammers, covering wells with cloth, burning shiny trinkets. What once was ordinary became taboo. Elders began speaking in hushed tones about the old days, before the village grew quiet and careful. Stories long buried were unearthed, dusted off, reshaped. They spoke of the mirror curse, of girls who vanished after seeing something in the glass, of spirits that stole faces to escape their prisons. One tale told of an ancient woman, faceless and furious, who returned every 100 years to balance a forgotten wrong. The children, curious and afraid, began to whisper among themselves. "She's justice," one would say, eyes wide. "She came back because someone lied." Another would respond, "No, she's not human. My grandfather said she's a vessel now. She's full of eyes you can't see." And always, the stories returned to the stepmother. It started subtly. The way people stopped greeting her first. How conversations would end when she approached. Her invitations to tea declined, her presence met with tense smiles. A merchant refused to sell her polished silver. A neighbor muttered prayers when she passed. She could feel it tightening around her like a net. Worse still were the things she thought she saw. At night, she would hear soft footsteps in the hallway, but no one was there. In the mirror above her wash basin, she once caught a glimpse of Nalia's eyes, just eyes, watching. The moment she blinked, it was gone. Then came the dreams. Endless corridors of glass, reflections that followed her when she turned away, whispers that spoke her name in a voice that was both hers and not hers. She began to sleep with the mirror covered, but still the dreams came. And every morning her face looked a little older, a little more tired. The villagers noticed. "She's fading," someone said at the well. "She's being watched," replied another. "She's being judged," added a third. The priest was called. He performed rites outside the house, but his hands trembled. When asked about the faceless one, he only said, "Not all spirits are meant to be fought. Some must be remembered." Soon, folklore took root in every corner of the village. Songs were sung in whispers. Children dared each other to say Nalia's name into water 3 times. Mothers braided protective charms into their daughters' hair. No one dared approach the forest where the faceless one had last been seen. And if anyone caught a glimpse of something pale in the trees, they didn't speak of it. Fear turned into belief. Belief into ritual. The village had found a new religion, one born of guilt and shadow. As for the stepmother, she stopped appearing in public. Her windows remained shut. Her laughter, once a fixture at village gatherings, was never heard again. Some said she'd gone mad. Others said she was simply waiting, for what, no one knew. But a few swore they saw her speaking to her own reflection late at night, arguing, pleading. What began as silence had become a chorus. And somewhere in the darkness, behind the forest's veil of trees, the faceless one listened. It began with footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing on the damp earth beneath a moonless sky. The village lay still, shuttered against the night, but something moved through the mist. The faceless one. Cloaked in shadow, her outline more suggestion than shape, she glided through the heart of the village. Doors bolted. Curtains drawn. Even the dogs didn't bark. She was not there for them. Inside the house that had grown cold and empty, the stepmother sat before the only mirror she hadn't broken. Her eyes were sunken, her skin tight with sleeplessness, her breath shallow. She no longer cried. There was no one left to hear. The villagers avoided her, whispers blooming behind her back like weeds. Every night she lit candles, and every night she watched the mirror, waiting. Tonight, the candlelight flickered violently as if it sensed what approached. The flames bent toward the window, toward the figure now standing just outside. She didn't hear the door open. She didn't see it move. But she knew. Her body stiffened. Her hands gripped the arms of the chair. She turned her head slowly, and found herself face to face with what she had feared for so long. The faceless one stood in the doorway. No eyes, no mouth, no expression, but somehow her presence was unmistakable. The stepmother's voice caught in her throat. Her lips moved, but no words came out. Her breath fogged the glass of the mirror beside her. The faceless one lifted a single hand. The gesture was not aggressive, not threatening. It was summoning. And the stepmother obeyed. Drawn like a moth to flame, she followed the shadowed figure through the village, down the winding path toward the forgotten wing of the house, the part that had long been abandoned, sealed off, and rumored cursed. The room of mirrors. The air thickened with every step, heavy with something unspoken. The wind stirred, and above them clouds twisted unnaturally fast. The trees whispered in agitation. Something was waking. The door to the mirror room creaked open as if it had been waiting all along. Candles lit themselves along the walls, revealing row after row of tall mirrors, tarnished, cracked, some shattered beyond repair. The room pulsed with strange energy and time slowed. The stepmother stepped inside, trembling. The faceless one followed, silent and still. Then the door slammed shut. The mirrors began to murmur. At first, the voices were soft, incomprehensible. Then louder, clearer. And the voices were all the same. Nalia's. They came from every surface, every corner, every reflection. Some laughed. Some sobbed. Others screamed. The stepmother spun in place, wild-eyed. "Stop," she shouted. "This isn't real. You were supposed to disappear. You were nothing." But the mirrors did not stop. They shuddered with every word, amplifying the echoes of the past. "You locked her here," one voice accused. You feared her light, another hissed. You envied the love she carried, what you never could earn. The faceless one turned slowly toward the stepmother. No, she cried. You don't understand. I only wanted. I only meant. She stopped, swallowed, then screamed, she wasn't mine. She wasn't mine and she wouldn't obey. Suddenly, the mirror behind her cracked, one long, jagged line running down its center. Then another mirror shattered with a deafening pop. Then another. The walls began to tremble. You killed her joy, a voice whispered. You killed her name. The room felt smaller now, pressing in like a tightening fist. Wind howled outside. Thunder rolled in. The storm had arrived. The stepmother dropped to her knees. Please, she sobbed. I didn't know what would happen. I thought the room would change her. I thought it would fix her spirit. Her voice broke. She was too much. Too bright. The largest mirror, standing directly in front of her, began to glow. Inside it, a shape began to emerge. Not distorted, not monstrous, just a girl. Nalia. Her eyes were clear, her face unmarked. She looked calm. Kind. Oh. She stared at the stepmother, her head slightly tilted. The stepmother gasped. Nalia, she whispered. You're? But Nalia did not respond. She only lifted one finger and pointed, to the left. The stepmother turned. Another mirror had cleared. In it, a reflection of herself, but younger, harsher. Her eyes full of resentment and jealousy. You resented her love for your husband, the room spoke. You envied what was never yours. The mirror cracked. The faceless one raised both hands now, and the wind surged through the seams of the room. Lightning struck the house. Wood splintered. Mirrors exploded like glass rain. Still, the stepmother remained, kneeling, shielding herself with her arms. I'm sorry, she shrieked. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Take it back. Undo it. But the room of mirrors does not forget. The faceless one stepped forward. With no face there was no expression, but there was judgment, absolute and final. Her hand pressed gently to the stepmother's chest. Not a strike. Not a push. Just contact. And the stepmother vanished. No scream. No flare of light. Just a ripple in the air, and then nothing. The house trembled one final time before collapsing in on itself. Dust rose to the sky like ash from a dying fire. Trees bent low as if in mourning. The storm broke with a final thunderclap and then silence. When dawn came, the village found only ruins. Every mirror was shattered, except one. Standing untouched in the center of the debris, it reflected something the villagers couldn't explain. It was clean, uncracked, and within it, Nalia stood smiling. Not eerie. Not vengeful. Just peaceful. Some say they saw her nod. From that day, the room of mirrors was never spoken of again in open terms. The villagers rebuilt, quietly. They hung cloth over any reflective surface. They spoke less, listened more. They taught their children the value of truth, of light, and of never turning a blind eye to cruelty. No one ever saw the faceless one again. But they knew better than to forget her. And if you walk past the forest at dawn, you might see a shimmer among the trees. You might feel a presence, not frightening but heavy, meaningful. As if someone is watching, remembering. The last mirror still stands, hidden beneath ivy and ruin, and if you look into it long enough, you just might see a girl smiling back. A girl named Nalia. A girl who was never broken. Only buried. Until now. Years passed and the village grew quiet again, not with ignorance but with reverence. Where once stood the cursed house with its shattered mirrors and rotting memories, there now stood a shrine. No builder claimed its making. No blueprint ever existed. Yet one morning the ruins were gone, replaced by a simple structure of stone and wood, open to the sky, standing where the room of mirrors had collapsed. It was neither grand nor modest. It simply was. At its center stood the last surviving mirror. Tall and untouched, it reflected only what needed to be seen. The villagers never dared look too long into it. Some swore that when they passed by they saw a flicker, like a girl turning to smile before vanishing into silver mist. No one went inside the shrine, but all left offerings at its stone steps. Flowers, bits of ribbon, polished stones, crude carvings of faces, and mirrors, small ones, broken ones, covered ones. Not as gifts but as confessions. People came not just from the village but from other lands, drawn by whispers of what had happened there. They arrived with guilt or grief, seeking something unnamed. And they left with lighter hearts, never quite able to explain why. In the years that followed, the village shifted in subtle but profound ways. Where once the people turned blind eyes to suffering, now they paid attention. When a child cried, someone always listened. When a neighbor whispered of unease, others gathered not to gossip, but to help. The silence that had once protected cruelty was broken for good. Children were taught to greet their reflections every morning with care. Not vanity, not pride, but acknowledgement. Know thy reflection, elders would say, or it shall know you too well. The proverb spread like roots into the soil of daily life. No home kept uncovered mirrors. Every surface that reflected, water, glass, polished wood, was treated with respect. Some villagers placed small bowls of water beneath their beds, believing the spirit of Nalia watched over them through the glimmer of those surfaces. And many swore they had seen her, not in full form but in glimpses, a smiling girl in a puddle after rain, a flicker of motion in a darkened window, a face in the steam on a mirror that vanished before they could look again. Children grew up knowing her name. They spoke of her not with fear but with awe. She is the girl who was not erased, one mother would whisper to her daughter at bedtime. She found herself again when the world tried to make her disappear. Others simply called her the mirror watcher. The stepmother's name was not forgotten either, but it was never spoken aloud. Her story was etched into silence, a cautionary tale carved into every cautious glance cast toward a mirror's edge. Once a year on the longest night, the villagers gathered at the shrine. They brought lanterns and sang songs of memory and mercy. No one led the gathering. No prayers were spoken aloud. But everyone came with one thought in their hearts, to honor Nalia, not just for surviving but for returning. Some said she never truly left. And they weren't wrong. Every now and then a child born to the village would stare too long into a still pond and whisper something strange, "She's laughing," or "She says hello." When asked who, they would simply shrug as if the answer was obvious. The mirror had become more than an object. It had become a watcher, a keeper of truths no one dared to bury again. One spring a child disappeared briefly. Gone for only a day. When she returned, she held a shard of mirror in her palm and said, "She told me to always speak when I see wrong." She was never quite the same after that, quieter, kinder, fiercer. The mirror taught in ways no elder could. The village didn't need guards or borders. Their protection came from awareness, from the knowledge that somewhere, just behind the glass, was a face that once had none, watching not with vengeance, but with understanding born from unspeakable pain. One traveler, after leaving the shrine, wrote in a worn journal, "I saw my truest self today, and she looked like a girl I once ignored." And so, the story of Nalia, the mirror room, and the faceless one wove itself into the fabric of the land. It wasn't told with fanfare or fear but with reverence. A quiet lesson passed down not through punishment but through presence. In the end, Nalia didn't need revenge. She had a reflection that outlived cruelty, a name whispered with love, and a mirror that watched all, not to punish but to remind. The village moved on. But the mirror remained.